He stood over her, his words like shards of ice on the coldest winter night. "I'm done, Isabel. I'm done with this pathetic life. Done with you." She was 6 months pregnant with his child, clutching a stained ceramic mug he'd gifted her, her world collapsing in their tiny, damp apartment. He chose another woman, one who promised him a world of glittering success. He threw his pregnant wife out into the pouring rain for a life of luxury, never once looking back. But what happens when the woman you threw away holds the key to your entire world? What happens when you discover the meek, humble woman you discarded is one of the richest people on the continent? This is the story of a devastating betrayal, a secret kept for years, and the moment one man realized he hadn't just lost his wife, he'd thrown away an empire. The rain didn't just fall, it assaulted the city. It hammered against the thin window panes of the small, fourth-floor walk-up apartment that Isabel Clarke and Ethan Cole called home. Inside, the storm was of a different nature, colder and far more destructive. "What do you mean, you're done?" Isabel's voice was a whisper, barely audible over the drumming of the rain and the frantic beating of her own heart. She clutched her rounded belly, a protective instinct kicking in as the world tilted on its axis. Ethan stood by the door, already wearing the expensive trench coat she'd saved for months to buy him for his birthday. It looked out of place in their cramped living room, with its second-hand furniture and her canvases stacked against the wall. He looked out of place. He was a man wearing a costume for a life he desperately wanted, a life that didn't include her. "I mean exactly what I said." His tone was flat, devoid of the warmth she had fallen in love with 5 years ago. "I can't do this anymore, Is. The bills, this shoebox apartment, the constant struggle. I'm meant for more than this." "We're meant for more," she corrected, tears welling in her eyes. "We've always said that. We're a team. I'm working. You're close to that promotion at sterling price. And the baby." Her voice broke. "Ethan, we're having a baby." He finally looked at her, and the cold indifference in his eyes was what broke her. It was a look she'd never seen before, the look of a stranger. "The baby complicates things," he said, as if discussing a minor spreadsheet error. "It's a responsibility I'm not ready for. Not in this poverty." "Poverty?" She choked out a laugh that was more of a sob. "We have food. We have a roof over our heads. We have each other. I thought that was enough to start." "Well, it's not enough for me," he snapped, his voice finally rising. The facade of calm cracked, revealing the ugly ambition and resentment beneath. "I want the corner office, the penthouse suite, the respect that comes with real money, not freelance graphic design and dreams that don't pay the bills." Every word was a calculated blow. He knew her art was her soul, the one thing that was entirely hers. He had once claimed to love that about her. Now he used it as a weapon. A horrible, sickening realization began to dawn on Isabel. This wasn't a sudden decision. This was a verdict that had been reached long ago, and he was only now delivering the sentence. "There's someone else, isn't there?" Ethan didn't flinch. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Her name is Jessica Monroe. Her father is Walter Monroe." The name hit Isabel like a physical blow. Walter Monroe, the real estate titan, a man whose name was synonymous with power and wealth in the city. Ethan had been working on a proposal for Monroe's firm for months. He'd spoken of Jessica, the daughter, a vice president at her father's company. He'd called her a key contact, a shark. "She can give me the life I deserve, Isabel," Ethan continued, his voice taking on a sickeningly earnest tone. "She sees my potential. She's introduced me to people you couldn't even dream of meeting. We have a future. And what about our future? Our baby? Isabel's hands trembled. The mug she held, a silly thing with a cartoon bear that said, "World's Best Hugger," felt impossibly heavy. It was the first gift he'd ever given her. "I'll have my lawyer send over the papers," he said, his hand on the doorknob. "And I'll need you out by the end of the week. Jessica and we're taking a place in the Upper East Side. This apartment, the lease is in my name. I'm terminating it." The cruelty was breathtaking. He wasn't just leaving her, he was erasing her, making her homeless, pregnant, and alone. "Ethan, please," she begged, the last of her pride dissolving into sheer terror. "Don't do this. Not now. Think about our child." He turned, his face a mask of stone. "I am. And I think this child is better off not being raised in a place like this, by someone with no ambition." He paused, delivering the final, soul-crushing blow. "Jessica and I might start our own family one day. A proper one." The ceramic mug slipped from her numb fingers, shattering on the worn linoleum floor. The sound was deafening in the sudden silence. The cartoon bear was in pieces, just like her heart, just like her life. Ethan looked at the mess on the floor with disgust, then back at her. "Clean that up," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. And then he opened the door and walked out into the storm, leaving Isabel in the ruins of the life they had built. The sound of the shattering mug echoing the complete and total demolition of her world. She sank to the floor, her body racked with sobs, her hands protectively wrapped around the child he had just disowned. She was alone. Utterly and completely alone. The next 3 days were a blur of numb disbelief and rising panic. The sound of the front door closing behind Ethan echoed in Isabel's ears, a permanent, taunting reminder of her new reality. The apartment, once a cozy haven filled with shared laughter and the smell of her oil paints, now felt like a tomb. Every object was a memory, every memory a fresh wound. She packed her life into 2 worn suitcases and a cardboard box. Her art supplies, the few clothes that still fit over her growing belly, a handful of photos from a time when Ethan's smiles were genuine. He had been true to his word. A crisp, formal email from a law firm, Goldman, Finch and Associates, had arrived the next morning, informing her of the dissolution of their marriage and the termination of the lease. He had even cancelled their joint bank account, leaving her with the $274 she had in her purse. Her best friend, Maya Singh, a fiery junior associate at a rival law firm, was apoplectic. "He can't just do this! Izzy, this is illegal! Spousal abandonment! Duress! I'll bury him in litigation!" Maya's voice crackled with rage over the phone. Isabel, sitting on the floor of the now empty apartment, could barely summon the energy to respond. "He has the better lawyers, Maya. He has the Monroes. What do I have? $200 and a box of pastels." "You have me," Maya said fiercely. "Stay with me. We'll figure this out." But Isabel couldn't bring herself to do it. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. To show up on her friend's doorstep, pregnant and abandoned, felt like the ultimate admission of failure. She had chosen Ethan. She had defended him to everyone who had ever harbored a doubt. And now, this. "I just need a few days to think," she lied, forcing a strength she didn't feel into her voice. "I'll check into a motel, clear my head." The motel she found was on the bleakest edge of the city, a place where neon signs flickered with dying ambition, and the carpet smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. The room was tiny, the bedspread was scratchy, and the window looked out onto a brick wall. It was the physical manifestation of her life. A dead end. For 2 days she barely moved, alternating between bouts of hysterical crying and long, vacant hours staring at the water-stained ceiling. She ate saltine crackers and drank tap water, trying to convince herself it was for the baby. The baby. A tiny, innocent life was depending on her, and she had never felt more useless, more broken. Ethan's face flashed in her mind, not the cold stranger from that night, but the charming, ambitious man she'd fallen for. The man who'd quoted poetry during their first date, who'd held her for hours after her mother's funeral, who'd sworn he would love her forever. Was it all a lie? Or had she been so blinded by love that she'd refused to see the rot growing beneath the surface? On the third night, her money was nearly gone. The motel bill was due in the morning. Her phone buzzed with another frantic message from Maya. She ignored it. The panic was no longer a rising tide. It was a tsunami, and it was about to pull her under. She looked at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale. She saw not just a heartbroken woman, but a fool, a naive girl who had believed in a fairy tale. Her family had warned her. Oh, how they had warned her. Not with anger, but with a quiet, concerned caution. They had seen something in Ethan she hadn't, a ravenous hunger for status that would eventually consume everything else. She had cut herself off from them, not out of malice, but out of a fierce, desperate need to prove them wrong, to prove her love was real and her choices were sound. She had insisted on living this normal life, on her own terms, without a safety net. Now, the net was gone, the tightrope had snapped, and she was in a freefall, clutching her stomach, feeling the faint flutter of her child inside. A different feeling began to surface through the grief and shame. Anger. A cold, hard diamond of fury. Fury at Ethan. Fury at Jessica Monroe. But most of all, fury at herself for letting this happen, for allowing herself to become this helpless. Her baby deserved more than a mother staring at a motel ceiling, waiting for the world to crush her. Her baby deserved a fighter. With a trembling hand, she reached for her phone. She scrolled past Maya's name, past the blocked number of her estranged husband, all the way down the contact list. Her finger hovered for a long, agonizing moment over a name she hadn't dialed in over a year. A name that represented a world she had run away from, a world of unimaginable power and privilege, a world she had sworn she didn't need. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Isabel Clarke pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice. A deep, familiar voice answered, crisp and formal, a voice that commanded boardrooms and brought titans of industry to heel. Adrienne DeLuca. Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time in days, they were not tears of despair. They were tears of surrender, of desperation, of a final, last-ditch hope. "Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's me. It's Isabel. I need you to come get me. I've made a terrible mistake." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. For a terrifying second, Isabel thought he might hang up, that her stubborn pride had finally eroded the last of his patience. But Adrienne DeLuca was a man who processed information with the speed of a supercomputer and acted with the precision of a surgeon. "Give me your location. Do not move," he said. The voice was stripped of emotion, but beneath the command was a current of urgency she hadn't heard in years. She recited the seedy motel's address, her voice barely a whisper. "A car will be there in 20 minutes, he stated. "The driver's name is Arthur. He will have a password, St. Moritz. Do not get in the car unless he gives you that name. Is that understood?" "Yes, Dad," she sobbed, relief washing over her so intensely her knees went weak. "Isabel," he added, and for the first time, a sliver of the father she knew broke through the CEO's facade. "Hold on, we're coming." The line went dead. True to his word, exactly 19 minutes later, a sleek, black Bentley Mulsanne, so silent it seemed to materialize out of the city grime, pulled up in front of the motel. A man in a tailored black suit, with graying temples and a calm, professional demeanor, stepped out. He was exactly as she remembered him. Arthur, her father's head of security for over 30 years. He met her at the door of her room, his eyes sweeping over her disheveled state and the cheap motel with a practiced impassivity that betrayed nothing. But Isabel saw a flicker of something in his gaze, concern, maybe even pity. "Miss Isabel," he said, his voice a low, respectful rumble. "It's good to see you." "Hello, Arthur," she managed, clutching her 2 suitcases. He gently took them from her. "The password is St. Moritz," he said, the formality a strange comfort in her chaotic world. "Thank you," she whispered. He led her to the car, opening the heavy rear door to reveal an interior of soft cream leather and polished burr walnut that smelled faintly of her father's cologne. The world of the motel, the peeling paint, the flickering lights, the desperation, seemed to dissolve as the door closed with a muted, expensive thud. She was in a different universe now. The universe she had abandoned. The drive was silent. They left the city's gritty edges behind, gliding onto highways that led to the manicured, tree-lined avenues of the super-rich. An hour later, they turned onto a private road, flanked by a 10-foot stone wall. Massive, wrought-iron gates, bearing a stylized D, swung open silently as they approached. The De Luca estate. It wasn't a house. It was a principality. A sprawling limestone mansion that blended classic European architecture with modern glass walls, set on 100 acres of rolling hills, private lakes, and ancient forests. It was the place she had grown up, a gilded cage she had felt compelled to escape in search of something real. Looking at it now, after the harsh reality of the last few days, it looked like the safest place on earth. Arthur pulled up to the grand entrance, where the lights were blazing. As he opened her door, another figure emerged from the house. Adrian De Luca stood at the top of the marble steps, a formidable silhouette against the bright light. He was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and eyes that could dissect a balance sheet or a man's character from 100 paces. He wore a cashmere sweater and tailored trousers, but he still radiated an aura of immense power. As Isabel slowly climbed the steps, he descended to meet her. His face was a mask of stern control, but his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, were filled with a storm of emotions, anger, relief, and a deep, profound sadness. He stopped in front of her, his gaze dropping to her pregnant belly, then rising to meet her tear-filled eyes. "You should have called sooner," he said, his voice rough. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, laced with the pain of a father who felt he'd failed to protect his child. "I was ashamed," she whispered. "I was so wrong, Dad, about everything, about him." He didn't say, "I told you so," though the words hung unspoken in the air between them. He had seen Ethan Cole for exactly what he was, from their very first meeting, a shallow social climber with an insatiable appetite for more. He had seen the way Ethan's eyes had lingered on the paintings on the wall, not with appreciation for the art, but with the quick calculation of an appraiser. Instead of lecturing her, Adrian De Luca did something he rarely did. He pulled his daughter into a firm, protective embrace. He held her as she finally let go of the last of her crumbling composure, her body shaking with silent sobs against his chest. "It doesn't matter now," he murmured into her hair. "None of it matters. You're home. You're safe. And no one," he added, his voice hardening into steel, "will ever hurt you or my grandchild again. I will personally see to it." He pulled back, holding her at arm's length and looking at her with an intensity that made her shiver. "First, we get you healthy. We get you strong." Then, a dangerous glint appeared in his eye. "We will deal with Mr. Ethan Cole and the Monroes. They have made a grave miscalculation. They thought they were swatting a fly. They have no idea they've just poked a dragon." He guided her inside, into the grand foyer where the staff was waiting discreetly. The warmth, the quiet efficiency, the sheer scale of the place. It was overwhelming. He had already summoned her old doctor and a nutritionist. A suite of rooms overlooking the gardens was being prepared for her. The full force of the DeLuca Empire was mobilizing, not for a corporate takeover, but to heal one broken heart and protect one unborn child. Isabel leaned on her father's arm, feeling a strange mix of relief and trepidation. She had escaped this world to find herself. Now, she had returned to it, broken to save herself. The irony was not lost on her, but as she looked up at the determined, formidable man beside her, she knew one thing for certain. The game had just changed, and Ethan Cole was about to find out what it truly meant to be powerless. The weeks that followed were a period of quiet, meticulous reconstruction. The DeLuca estate became a sanctuary, a high-tech cocoon designed to heal and fortify her. The first order of business was her health and the baby's. Dr. Alistair Finch, the family's physician for 2 generations, oversaw her care with a team of specialists. A nutritionist planned her meals, a prenatal yoga instructor worked with her in a sun-drenched atrium, and a therapist helped her navigate the treacherous emotional terrain of her grief and betrayal. Slowly, the haunted look in her eyes began to fade, replaced by a growing resolve. She gained weight, her skin regained its color, and her baby bump grew firm and healthy. The initial shame of her return was gradually supplanted by a quiet gratitude. She had run from this world of privilege, believing it was hollow. Now she understood it for what it was, a tool, a powerful one. Her father, Adrian, was a constant, steady presence. He didn't coddle her. Instead, he started bringing her files. At first, they were reports from the DeLuca Foundation, the family's massive philanthropic arm. "Read this," he'd say, dropping a thick binder on the table beside her. "A proposal for a new arts endowment for underprivileged youth. They're being stonewalled by the city council. Find the flaw in their approach." Isabel, who had only ever used her artistic talent for small freelance projects, found a new application for her creativity. She saw the world differently than the corporate sharks on the Foundation's board. She redesigned the proposal, focusing on human stories and community impact rather than dry statistics. She storyboarded a presentation that was emotional, powerful, and undeniable. Adrian reviewed her work, a single appreciative nod his highest form of praise. "Good. You have your mother's eye for the heart of a matter." He began to pull her deeper into the business. She sat in on video conferences, initially as a silent observer. She listened as her father and his executive team discussed billion-dollar acquisitions, hostile takeovers, and global market strategies. It was a language she had once tuned out, but now she listened intently. She was no longer Isabel Clarke, the struggling artist. She was Isabel DeLuca, and this was her birthright. The intelligence that had been focused on color theory and composition now absorbed financial projections and legal frameworks. She took a particular interest in a new venture capital division of DeLuca Industries, one focused on funding sustainable technology startups. It was an area the older, more conservative board members were skeptical of, but Isabel saw the future in it. She spent her nights devouring research, preparing counter-arguments, and identifying promising companies. One evening, she presented a detailed 50-page analysis to her father, outlining why they should invest heavily in a small, unknown company developing biodegradable plastics. He read the entire document in silence. When he finished, he looked at her, his expression unreadable. This is a high-risk, high-reward play. It goes against our current portfolio strategy. Isabel's heart sank. I understand. I just thought. I'm appointing you to the Oversight Committee for the Venture Capital Fund, effective tomorrow, he cut in. You will champion this. If it succeeds, the credit is yours. If it fails, he paused, a slight smile touching his lips. The blame is also yours. Welcome to the family business, Isabel. She wasn't just healing, she was transforming. The fragile girl who had crumpled to the floor of a tiny apartment was being forged into something new, something stronger, something with the resources of an empire at her back. Meanwhile, across the city, Ethan Cole was living the life he had always dreamed of. He and Jessica Munro had moved into a stunning, glass-walled penthouse overlooking Central Park. His wardrobe was now filled with designer suits, his wrist adorned with a watch that cost more than his old car, and his social calendar was a whirlwind of exclusive parties, gallery openings, and charity galas. He had been given a vice president title at Munro Holdings, with a corner office and a salary that was, frankly, obscene. He was Walter Munro's golden boy, the sharp, ambitious young man who was also dating his daughter. It was perfect. Or, it was almost perfect. The gloss began to wear off surprisingly quickly. The penthouse, for all its splendor, never felt like home. It was Jessica's space, decorated by a fashionable interior designer with a taste for cold, minimalist furniture that was beautiful to look at, but uncomfortable to live in. There was no room for anything of his. Not that he had much to bring. Jessica, who had been so charming and seductive during their clandestine affair, was different now. She was possessive, demanding, and possessed a casual cruelty that often took his breath away. She criticized his choice of tie, his pronunciation of a French wine, the way he held his fork. He was her project, a handsome accessory she was molding to fit her world. Their conversations rarely touched on anything personal. They were about appearances, connections, and transactions. There was no warmth, no intimacy, none of the easy laughter he had once shared with Isabel. His work at Munro Holdings was also not what he had envisioned. He wasn't a rising star. He was an errand boy with a fancy title. Walter Munro didn't mentor him. He used him. Ethan was tasked with the grunt work on a massive new development project, the Phoenix Tower. He spent his days chasing permits, placating angry union reps, and preparing endless presentations that Walter would then deliver as his own. He was a highly paid functionary, a cog in the Munro machine, given just enough status to keep him compliant. One night, sitting in a restaurant where the water cost more than a full meal at the diner he and Isabel used to frequent, he found himself thinking about her. He pictured her in their old apartment, laughing as she accidentally smudged paint on her nose. The memory was so vivid, so filled with a warmth that was entirely absent from his current life, that it felt like a punch to the gut. He pushed the thought away, taking a sip of his $300 bottle of wine. This was what he wanted. He had won. He was successful. He was happy. He just had to keep telling himself that until it felt true. His friends, like his former colleague Ben Carter, saw the change. Ben met him for a drink one evening, an awkward encounter Ethan had agreed to out of some lingering sense of his old life. "You look good, man." "Tired but good," Ben said, eyeing Ethan's expensive suit. "It's a demanding role," Ethan said, trying to sound important. "I bet." "So how's Isabel?" Ben asked, his tone cautious. "Nobody's heard from her." Ethan stiffened. "I have no idea. We're divorced. She's out of my life." "Right, but pregnant and all." "I just hope she's okay." "She's a survivor," Ethan said dismissively, though a cold knot of something, guilt, curiosity, tightened in his stomach. He had made no effort to check on her. He had sent the legal papers and a single paltry check as a final settlement, which had been returned, uncashed, by her lawyer. He had taken it as a sign she wanted nothing to do with him, and had been relieved. As he walked back to his gleaming, empty penthouse that night, the city lights glittering below like a carpet of scattered diamonds, he felt a profound and unsettling loneliness. He had everything he had ever wanted. So why did he feel like he had nothing at all? 6 months after Ethan had walked out on Isabel, the Phoenix Tower project was his entire world. It was Walter Monroe's magnum opus, a towering skyscraper of shimmering glass and steel that was set to redefine the city's skyline. For Ethan, it was the symbol of his new life, the tangible proof that his brutal choice had been the right one. His name was on the internal memos. He sat in the high-level meetings, and he basked in the reflected glory of the Monroe Empire. But the project was a voracious beast, constantly demanding more. More money, more political maneuvering, more of Ethan's soul. The initial funding tranches were secured, but to complete the ambitious final phase, a state-of-the-art sustainable energy system, and a public art installation, Monroe Holdings needed a massive infusion of capital from a private investor. "This is the final piece of the puzzle, Ethan," Walter Monroe had boomed in a recent meeting, his large hand clapping Ethan's shoulder with a force that was more of a blow than a friendly gesture. "The investor we're courting is notoriously private, old money. They control one of the most powerful and diversified funds in the country. If we land them, the Phoenix Tower isn't just a building. It's a legacy. Don't screw this up." The pressure was immense. Ethan worked 18-hour days, his life reduced to spreadsheets, architectural drawings, and pandering to Jessica's whims. The cracks in his gilded cage were becoming impossible to ignore. Jessica's affection was directly proportional to his utility to her father. When he secured a difficult permit, she was loving. When a construction delay was announced, she was icy and dismissive. Love was a transaction, and his value was constantly being audited. He started having nightmares about Isabel. Not of the fight, but of the good times. Picnics in the park, lazy Sunday mornings, the quiet way she'd look at him from across a room, her eyes full of a love so unconditional it now seemed like a fantasy. He would wake up in the cold, sterile bedroom of the penthouse with a hollow ache in his chest, the faint scent of Jessica's expensive perfume doing nothing to comfort him. The first concrete whisper of his old life came from Ben Carter. They met for their now infrequent, strained drink. "You're not going to believe this," Ben said, scrolling through his phone. "Remember that tech startup, BioVera, that our firm passed on last year? The one developing those biodegradable polymers?" Ethan vaguely recalled it. A high-risk venture he himself had advised against. "What about them?" "They just secured a $50 million seed round," Ben said, his eyes wide, "from a new VC fund that's making huge waves, DeLuca Venture Partners. Apparently, the person who championed the deal and spotted their potential is some rising star on their board. Total genius, they're saying." The name DeLuca pricked at Ethan's consciousness. It was a powerful name, one associated with old-world industry and staggering, quiet wealth. It wasn't a name you heard often, because they didn't need the publicity. Never heard of the fund, Ethan lied, feigning disinterest. A week later, a second whisper came, this time from a more public source. Jessica was dragging him to the annual City Arts Patronage Gala, a stuffy event he despised. As they stood by the bar, Jessica air-kissing various socialites, Ethan overheard a conversation between two older, impeccably dressed women. "Absolutely saved the Youth Arts Initiative," one was saying. "The city was about to defund it entirely." "I know," the other replied. And then the DeLuca Foundation swept in. It wasn't just the money. Their new director of community engagement completely revamped the proposal. They say she has an artist's soul but a titan's mind, a real force of nature. What was her name again? Isabel something. Ethan's blood ran cold. He turned his head slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. Isabel. It couldn't be. There were thousands of Isabels in the city, and DeLuca. It was just a coincidence. His Isabel was a freelance designer who struggled to pay her bills. She wasn't a force of nature on the board of a major foundation. It was impossible. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was a poisonous one. That night, fueled by a terrifying curiosity he couldn't suppress, he did something he hadn't done in months. He went online, not to look at financial news or real estate blogs, but to search for her. He didn't search for Isabel Clarke. He knew that would lead to a dead end. On a gut-wrenching hunch, he typed Isabel DeLuca into the search bar. The results hit him like a physical shock. There were only a few, as the family was notoriously private. But they were enough. A brief mention in a press release from the DeLuca Foundation announcing her appointment. A single, low-resolution photo of her in the background of a group shot at a university dedication, her father, Adrian DeLuca, at the podium. But it was her. Older, more polished. Her hair was styled differently. She wore a simple but exquisitely tailored dress, and she held herself with a confidence he'd never seen before. She was standing tall, her pregnancy now a beautiful, proud curve under the elegant fabric. She looked powerful, radiant, and completely out of his reach. DeLuca. His mind reeled, trying to connect the dots. The quiet, humble artist he had married. The daughter of Adrian DeLuca? The man who was a legend, a phantom of the financial world, whose net worth was a subject of speculative fantasy among finance bros. It didn't make sense. She had lived with him in a tiny apartment, worried about grocery bills, wore clothes from thrift stores. Why? The answer came crashing down on him with the force of a physical blow. She had wanted to be loved for herself. Not for her name, not for her money. She had given him the ultimate test, and he had failed in the most spectacular way imaginable. He stumbled back from his laptop, gasping for air. The penthouse, his expensive suit, the watch on his wrist. It all felt like cheap plastic, a pathetic consolation prize. He hadn't traded up. He had traded down. He had traded a diamond for a piece of glass. He thought of the final investor for the Phoenix Tower, the private, powerful, old money fund that Walter Monroe was so desperate to impress, the fund that held the key to his entire future. A cold, sick dread pooled in his stomach. He didn't know who the investor was. Walter had kept the name a closely guarded secret, referring to them only as the client. But as Ethan stared at the picture of Isabel DeLuca, standing confidently beside her billionaire father, he had a sinking, terrifying feeling that he was about to find out. The night of the Phoenix Tower Investor Gala was the culmination of everything Ethan had worked for and sacrificed for. The event was held in a cavernous, beautifully restored industrial space, glittering with crystal chandeliers and the clinking of champagne flutes. The most powerful people in the city were there: real estate moguls, banking CEOs, politicians, and socialites. It was the world Ethan had killed his past self to enter. He stood beside Jessica and her father, a perfect picture of a successful young executive. He wore a custom-tailored tuxedo that cost more than 6 months' rent on his old apartment. He smiled, he shook hands, he made witty small talk. But inside, he was a hollow man, haunted by the digital ghost of Isabel DeLuca. His discovery had consumed him for weeks, a secret terror that gnawed at his insides. He'd tried to dismiss it as a wild coincidence, but the gnawing certainty in his gut told him otherwise. "Showtime, kid," Walter Monroe grunted, giving him a hard pat on the back. "The client is here. Their chief investment officer is making the rounds, but the final decision-maker is about to make their entrance. Remember, be charming. This deal makes or breaks us." Jessica squeezed his arm, her nails digging in slightly. "Don't embarrass me, Ethan. A lot is riding on this. My father's reputation. Our future." The unspoken threat was clear. His position in this world was entirely conditional. A hush fell over the crowd as the master of ceremonies took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed through the speakers, "it gives us immense pleasure to have you here tonight to celebrate the future of our city's skyline, the Phoenix Tower. This ambitious project would not be possible without visionary partners. Tonight, we are honored to finally announce the primary investor whose commitment and belief will bring this vision to life." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. His palms were slick with sweat. "Please don't be them. Please be anyone else. This investment is being spearheaded by their newest, most dynamic division, a fund dedicated to forward-thinking, sustainable urban development. Please join me in giving a massive welcome to the leadership of DeLuca Venture Partners." The name hit the room like a thunderclap. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. DeLuca. They never came to these things. They operated from the shadows. For them to publicly back a project was an endorsement of monumental significance. Walter Monroe's eyes were wide with a mixture of shock and elation. He had landed the biggest whale in the ocean. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. He felt Jessica's grip on his arm tighten to a painful degree. "And now," the MC continued, "it is my distinct honor to introduce the individual whose brilliant analysis and passionate advocacy made this partnership possible. A visionary new leader in the world of finance and philanthropy. Please welcome the head of the DeLuca Foundation's Committee for Urban Development and a senior partner at DVP, Ms. Isabel DeLuca." The world went into slow motion for Ethan. From a side entrance, she emerged. She was no longer the quiet, unassuming artist he had discarded. This was a different woman entirely. She wore a simple, elegant evening gown of deep emerald green that accentuated her now very prominent, beautiful baby bump. Her hair was swept up, revealing a graceful neck and a pair of diamond earrings that glittered like captive stars. But it wasn't the clothes or the jewels that stunned him into silence. It was her presence. She moved with an unshakable confidence, a serene power that commanded the attention of everyone in the room. She was not just a guest here. She was the center of gravity. Her eyes swept across the room, calm and appraising. When her gaze finally fell upon him, standing beside the Monroes, it was for the briefest of moments. There was no flicker of anger, no hint of pain, no sign of recognition at all. It was the cool, indifferent glance one might give a piece of furniture or a nameless waiter. In that single, dismissive look, he was utterly and completely erased. It was more devastating than any scream, any curse, any tearful accusation could ever have been. He was nothing to her. Isabel walked to the stage, taking the microphone. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and steady, resonating with an authority that belied her years. "Thank you," she began, a small, polite smile on her lips. DeLuca Venture Partners is proud to invest in the future. We believe in building legacies that are not just profitable, but sustainable and beneficial for the entire community. She spoke for 5 minutes about urban renewal, green technology, and community arts funding, the very things he had mocked as her pointless, unprofitable dreams. She was eloquent, intelligent, and utterly captivating. The crowd was hanging on her every word. Ethan felt Walter Munro's hand clamp down on his shoulder. "DeLuca!" Walter hissed in his ear, his voice a dangerous mix of fury and confusion. "Your ex-wife is Isabel DeLuca, the daughter of Adrian DeLuca, and you failed to mention this." I didn't know," Ethan stammered, his mind short-circuiting. Jessica stared at him, her perfectly made-up face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Her dream of marrying into power had just been eclipsed by the grotesque irony that her boyfriend had thrown away a literal princess to be with her. The value of her own transaction had just plummeted. After her speech, Isabel was immediately surrounded by a coterie of the city's most influential people, all vying for a moment of her time. Walter, seeing his legacy on the line, pasted on a sycophantic smile and began to drag Ethan and Jessica towards her. "We need to smooth this over." "Now," he snarled under his breath. They pushed through the crowd, finally breaking into the circle around Isabel. She was in conversation with the mayor. "Ms. DeLuca," Walter boomed, his voice oozing false charm. "A magnificent speech, Walter Munro, and this is my daughter, Jessica, and my vice president, Ethan Cole." Isabel turned her head slowly. She gave Walter and Jessica a brief professional nod. Then her eyes landed on Ethan. The cool indifference was gone, replaced by something far worse, a faint, almost pitying curiosity. She looked at him as if he were a mildly interesting insect she'd found under a rock. "Mr. Munro?" she said, her voice like polished steel. She did not acknowledge Ethan's name or existence. She turned back to the mayor. "As I was saying, Mr. Mayor, the Foundation's primary condition for the arts grant is that it remains independent of the developer's influence." She had cut him dead. In front of the mayor, in front of Walter, in front of the entire city's power structure. She hadn't just ignored him, she had surgically and expertly rendered him invisible. The humiliation was a physical force, sucking the air from his lungs. He was no longer Ethan Cole, the rising star. He was a footnote in the story of Isabel DeLuca's spectacular return. The man who was too stupid to realize who he had. The man who threw away an empire for a penthouse. As she laughed at something the mayor said, one hand resting protectively on her unborn child, his unborn child, Ethan finally understood. He hadn't just made a mistake. He had committed an act of self-destruction so complete, so catastrophic, that he would be falling from it for the rest of his life, and he had only just begun to hit the ground. The fallout from the gala was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, systematic demolition of Ethan's life. The car ride back to the penthouse was a tomb of frigid silence. The moment the door clicked shut behind them, the facade shattered. "You absolute moron!" Jessica's voice was a venomous shriek. She threw her diamond-encrusted clutch against the wall, where it hit with a sickening thud. "You had Isabel DeLuca, and you threw her away. For me? Do you have any idea how this makes me look? How this makes my father look?" "I told you, I didn't know," Ethan pleaded, his voice hoarse. She never said anything. We lived in a walk-up. We worried about bills. How could I have known? Because you're a fool, Walter Monroe interjected, his face purple with rage. He had followed them up. You're a climber, Cole. I knew that from the start. I thought it made you hungry. I didn't realize it made you blind, deaf, and stupid. You were married to the heiress of the DeLuca fortune, and you were complaining to me about your bonus? He paced the room like a caged animal. This entire deal, the Phoenix Tower, our reputation, it's all tied to her now, and you, the man who publicly humiliated her, are my VP and my daughter's boyfriend. You are a liability, a walking, breathing, multi-million-dollar liability. The next morning, the consequences began. Ethan arrived at his office to find his access card denied. When he was finally escorted upstairs by security, it was to Walter's office. A single cardboard box sat on the gleaming mahogany desk. "You're finished," Walter said, not even bothering to look at him. He was on the phone, presumably with someone from DeLuca's team, trying to salvage the deal. "Your position is terminated. Pack your things and get out of my building." "Walter, please," Ethan begged. "I can talk to her. I can fix this." Walter finally looked at him, his eyes filled with a contempt so profound it made Ethan flinch. "You are the last person on earth she wants to hear from. You talking to her would be like pouring gasoline on a fire." The DeLucas sent over a revised preliminary agreement this morning. It included a new clause. He slid a single piece of paper across the desk. It was an addendum, and one line was highlighted. Clause 7.4a. The immediate and permanent termination of employment and all business associations with Mr. Ethan Cole is a non-negotiable precondition for this partnership. It was her. Quietly, efficiently, and with the cold precision of a surgeon, she had excised him from the picture. There was no emotion, just a business decision. He was a bad asset, and she was liquidating him. "Get out," Walter repeated, his voice dangerously low. Humiliated, Ethan packed his few personal items into the box and was escorted out of the building, past the staring, whispering eyes of his former colleagues. When he got back to the penthouse, he found Jessica overseeing two men who were packing his designer suits into cheap garment bags. "What's this?" he asked, his stomach sinking. "I'm moving on, Ethan," she said, examining her nails with a bored expression. "Our association is no longer mutually beneficial. You have nothing left to offer me. In fact, you're a stain on my reputation. I need you gone by noon." "Jessica, after everything, you're just throwing me out." She finally looked at him, a cruel smirk on her face. "You seem to have a talent for getting thrown out. I should have realized. The problem wasn't your situation, it was you. You don't recognize value when you're staring it right in the face." By lunchtime, he was on the street with one box of personal effects and two garment bags of clothes that no longer felt like his. The penthouse, the job, the money, the woman, it had all been a mirage, and it had vanished, leaving him choking on the dust. His downfall was swift and brutal. His name was blacklisted in the financial and real estate communities. The story, though not public, spread like wildfire through the back channels of the city's elite. He was the fool who had scorned a DeLuca. No one would touch him. He couldn't get a call back for even the most junior analyst positions. He burned through his savings in a matter of weeks, moving from a hotel to a short-term rental, and finally to a grimy, single-room apartment that was even smaller and more depressing than the one he had once shared with Isabel. He sold the expensive watch, then the designer clothes, just to make rent. He was right back where he started, only this time he was completely alone. His so-called friends from his new life vanished. Even Ben Carter stopped returning his calls, disgusted by the full story of his cruelty to Isabel. He was a pariah. One rainy afternoon, as he sat in his squalid room eating canned soup, the full weight of his actions crashed down on him. He hadn't just lost a wealthy wife. He had lost the only person who had ever truly loved him. He had destroyed the genuine, loving partnership he'd had with Isabel for a counterfeit version of success. He had craved authenticity and power, and in his greed, he had traded the former for a brief, intoxicating loan of the latter. He thought of his unborn child, a child who would have the DeLuca name, a child who would grow up in a world of unimaginable opportunity, surrounded by love and security, a child who would be raised to see him not as a father, but as a cautionary tale, a ghost. The ambition that had driven him his entire life was gone, replaced by a profound, crushing emptiness. He looked around the damp, miserable room, a mirror image of the life he had so callously discarded. Karma, he realized with a bitter, hollow laugh, wasn't just a concept, it was a ledger, and his account was now deeply, irrevocably in the red. Months bled into a bleak spring, finding Ethan a ghost of his former self. His new reality was stocking grocery shelves at night, a menial penance for a lifetime of greed. The final crushing blow came from a brief Society column mention: the birth of Nicholas Clark DeLuca, her son, her name, a life he was completely erased from. A desperate need, not for forgiveness, but for confession, consumed him. He learned she would be dedicating a new children's wing at the city hospital, a project she had funded, and knew it was his only chance to face her. He stood across the street, a spectator to the life that should have been his. When the ceremony ended, she emerged, the picture of maternal grace, holding her child. Her eyes scanned the crowd and found him. For a moment, he saw a flicker of the past in her gaze, but it was instantly replaced by cool composure. A moment later, her security guard, Arthur, approached him. "Miss DeLuca will give you 2 minutes." They met on a nearby park bench. The chasm between them felt as wide as an ocean. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words raw and stripped of all artifice. "Isabel, for everything. I was a fool, cruel and weak, and I threw away the only real thing in my life. I don't want anything. I just needed you to know." She listened, her expression calm and unreadable. The silence stretched, amplifying the sound of the city around them. "I accept your apology, Ethan," she said finally, her voice soft but unbreakable. "Not for you, but for me. Holding on to anger is a burden, and my hands are quite full these days." She glanced lovingly towards her son, now with his nanny nearby. "This is my life now. My son, my work, my family. It's a full life. A happy one. The past," she met his eyes with a look of utter finality, "has no place here." She stood up, her poise unshakable. "I hope you find peace, Ethan. Goodbye." Without a backward glance, she walked away, returning to her car, to her son, to her future. Ethan remained on the bench, a relic of a past she had already moved on from. He had his closure, the final, painful acknowledgement that while his life had effectively ended that rainy night, hers, in the truest sense, had just begun. And so, Ethan learned the hardest lesson of all. Some things, once broken, can never be repaired. He had chased a world of glittering surfaces, only to discover he'd traded away the one person who was pure gold. Isabel's story isn't just about the stunning reversal of fortune. It's a powerful testament to the quiet strength that lies within us when we're pushed to our absolute limit. It's about rediscovering your own worth when someone else tries to render you worthless. It's a story about karma, and how the universe has a way of balancing the books in the most spectacular fashion. Have you ever seen someone so spectacularly underestimate the person they were with? What do you think was the most satisfying moment of Ethan's downfall? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience, betrayal, and ultimate triumph moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss the next gripping story we have in store for you. Thank you for listening. He thought he had planned the perfect romantic escape, a 7-day Caribbean cruise shrouded in secrecy and drenched in luxury. For Leonard Vance, it was the ultimate deception, a week with his beautiful young mistress, Tiffany, far from the prying eyes of his life back home, and miles away from his career-driven wife, Catherine. He'd spun a masterful tale of a mandatory corporate retreat in Miami, a lie as smooth as the expensive scotch in his hand. The champagne was chilled, the ocean beckoned, and his new life felt tantalizingly close. But as the magnificent vessel, the MM Serenity, pulled away from the port, a voice echoed through the ship's intercom, a voice that was cool, confident, and terrifyingly familiar. It was the voice of the ship's captain, and it was the voice of the wife he thought he'd left on shore. The air in the port of Miami was thick with a cocktail of salt, diesel, and anticipation. Leonard Vance adjusted his designer sunglasses, the Florida sun glinting off the ridiculously expensive watch on his wrist. It was a gift to himself, a celebratory token for a successful quarter, and, more importantly, for pulling this off. Beside him, Tiffany Monroe, all flowing sundress and wide-brimmed hat, squeezed his arm, her excitement a palpable, infectious buzz. "Oh, Leo, look at it! It's magnificent," she breathed, her eyes wide as she gazed up at the towering white hull of the MS Serenity. It wasn't just a ship. It was a floating city, a monument to leisure and luxury that promised to carry them away from everything mundane. "Only the best for you, my dear," Leo said, his voice a low, confident purr. He felt a surge of pride, of power. At 48, he was supposed to be settling into a comfortable, predictable middle age, but here he was, embarking on a clandestine adventure with a woman half his age who looked at him like he'd hung the moon. The lie had been surprisingly easy to construct. His wife, Catherine, was used to his business trips. Her own career was so demanding, so all-consuming, that his absences were often met with a distracted, "Okay, honey, be safe. Call me when you land." This time was no different. He'd packed his bag under the pretense of a week-long leadership conference for his financial firm, even printing a fake itinerary and leaving it on the kitchen counter for good measure. "I'll be in meetings most of the day, darling," he had told her over a hasty breakfast 2 days ago. "Probably spotty reception. Don't worry if you can't get through." Catherine, already dressed in a sharp, practical pantsuit, had just nodded, her mind clearly elsewhere. "Of course. Just focus on your work. I have the Gibraltar to Rotterdam route simulations to run all week anyway. It's going to be a long one." Her work. It was always her work. Captain Catherine Mercer. It still sounded strange to him sometimes, even after all these years. He'd been proud of her once. He'd bragged to his friends about his wife, who commanded massive container ships through treacherous waters. But pride had slowly curdled into resentment. Her long stints at sea, the weeks and sometimes months of an empty house, had carved a chasm between them. The woman he had married, full of laughter and warmth, had been replaced by a hardened professional who spoke in terms of nautical miles and barometric pressure. The sea was her true spouse. He was merely a port of call. Tiffany was the antidote to all of that. She was an intern at his firm, bright-eyed and ambitious, and she saw him not as the husband of an absentee captain, but as Leonard Vance, the brilliant senior partner. She hung on his every word, laughed at his tired jokes, and made him feel like the man he had always wanted to be. The affair had started with furtive lunches and escalated to late nights at the office, a fire that thawed the lonely chill of his life. This cruise was his grand gesture. He was testing the waters, literally and figuratively, for a new life with her. He'd booked the Grand Astoria suite, a sprawling space with a private balcony, a jacuzzi tub, and a complimentary bottle of Dom Perignon waiting on ice. Mr. and Mrs. Vance, a porter in a crisp white uniform asked, taking their luggage. Leo didn't flinch at the name. He had booked it under his own, a foolish, arrogant move. But he'd reasoned that Catherine would never in a million years have reason to check a cruise ship's passenger manifest. "That's us," he said smoothly, slipping the man a $50 bill. As they walked up the gangway, the sheer scale of the ship's interior hit them. A grand atrium soared 10 decks high, with glass elevators gliding silently up and down its sides. A string quartet was playing softly on a mezzanine level, the elegant notes weaving through the excited chatter of the embarking passengers. It smelled of new carpet, expensive perfume, and limitless possibility. "Leo, this is unreal," Tiffany whispered, clutching his arm tighter. Their suite was even better than the pictures online. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling glass doors that led to their private balcony. The bed was enormous, piled high with plush pillows, and there, in a silver bucket, was the promised champagne. Leo popped the cork with a flourish, the sound echoing his own bubbling sense of triumph. He poured 2 crystal flutes, handing one to Tiffany. "A toast," he said, clinking his glass against hers. "To new beginnings. To us." She smiled, a dazzling, intoxicating smile that made him feel 20 years younger. "To us." They drank the champagne on the balcony as the ship's horn blared, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the deck. They watched the Miami skyline recede, the buildings shrinking into a distant postcard. For the first time in years, Leo felt utterly, completely free. He was anonymous here, just another wealthy man spoiling his beautiful wife. The guilt that had been a constant, low-level hum in the back of his mind finally fell silent, drowned out by the rhythmic churn of the ocean and Tiffany's delighted laughter. He had thought of everything. He had covered every track. For the next 7 days, Catherine didn't exist. His marriage, his responsibilities, his quiet, lonely house, it all belonged to a man he had left behind on the shore. Here, on the vast, unforgiving ocean, he was a new man, and his future was as bright and boundless as the horizon in front of them. While Leonard Vance toasted to his new life, 500 feet forward and 14 decks above, Captain Catherine Mercer stood on the bridge of the MS Serenity, her world a quiet, controlled symphony of technology and human expertise. The expansive space was a cocoon of calm efficiency, the panoramic windows offering an unobstructed 180-degree view of the sea. The setting sun painted the sky in strokes of orange and violet, but Catherine's focus was on the myriad of screens displaying charts, radar data, and engine telemetry. Her uniform was immaculate, a crisp white shirt with gold-striped epaulets denoting her rank, navy trousers, and polished black shoes. At 45, her face was framed by dark hair, pulled back in a severe but practical bun, with a few stray strands of silver at her temples. Her blue eyes, accustomed to scanning distant horizons, held a steady, unwavering authority. She moved with an economy of motion, her presence filling the bridge with a quiet confidence that her crew respected and relied upon. "Heading 090, Commander," she said, her voice calm and even, cutting through the low electronic hum. "090, Captain," her first officer, Ava Rostova, confirmed from the navigation console. Ava, a sharp and loyal officer in her late 30s, had served under Catherine for 3 years. She knew her captain's moods better than anyone, recognizing the subtle shift in her posture or the slight tightening of her jaw that betrayed any inner turmoil. For Catherine, the bridge was a sanctuary. The sea was demanding, unforgiving, but it was also honest. It held no deceptions, no hidden agendas. You respected its power, you understood its rules, and in return, it offered a profound sense of purpose. It was a stark contrast to her life on land, which had become a sea of unspoken resentments and widening emotional distances. Her marriage to Leo had once been her anchor. He was charming, ambitious, and had seemed to understand her passion for her career. But over the years, his understanding had frayed into impatience. Her promotions, which should have been moments of shared celebration, became sources of friction. "Another 3 months away, Kate? When do I get to have a wife?" he'd ask, the question laced with a guilt she refused to carry. She had tried to explain that this wasn't a job, it was a calling. She was one of a handful of women in the world to command a vessel of this class. It was a legacy she was building, not just for herself, but for the women who would come after her. He just couldn't see it. Last night, she had received the final passenger manifest. It was a routine part of her pre-departure duties, a document she usually scanned with professional detachment. But one name had leapt off the page, a gut punch that had stolen the air from her lungs. Vance, Leonard, Suite 1401, Grand Astoria Suite. She had stared at it for a full minute, her mind refusing to process the information. It had to be a mistake, a coincidence, another Leonard Vance. But the address listed for billing was their home address. The emergency contact was listed as Catherine Mercer, her own name. The blood had drained from her face. His leadership conference in Miami, his vague answers about the hotel, the way he'd avoided her eyes when he kissed her goodbye. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. He wasn't just cheating. He was doing it with an audacious, insulting arrogance, bringing his affair into her world, onto her ship. He was so convinced of her distance, so certain of her obliviousness, that he believed he could hide in plain sight. For a moment, a wave of pure, hot rage had washed over her. She'd imagined storming down to Suite 1401 and confronting them, the righteous, wronged wife. She'd pictured the shock on his face, the shame. But the rage had subsided as quickly as it came, replaced by something colder, harder, and far more familiar. Control. She was Captain Catherine Mercer. She did not create scenes. She commanded them. This was her ship, her domain. He wasn't a cheating husband here. He was a passenger, and he would abide by her rules. Now, as the ship settled into its course, she maintained an unreadable expression. Only Ava noticed the almost imperceptible tension in her shoulders. "Everything all right, Captain?" Ava asked quietly, her gaze flickering from the radar to Catherine's face. Catherine's eyes remained fixed on the horizon. "Perfectly fine, Commander. Just ensuring a smooth departure." An hour later, as the last vestiges of daylight disappeared and the ship became an island of glittering light on an endless dark sea, the time came for the captain's welcome announcement. It was a standard procedure, a message to be piped into every suite and public area, welcoming the 3,000 passengers aboard. Catherine picked up the broadcast microphone, her knuckles white. She took a slow, steadying breath, not as a wife preparing for a confrontation, but as a captain assuming command. She pressed the button. A soft chime echoed throughout the vessel, silencing the ambient music in the lounges and suites. In suite 1401, Leo and Tiffany were laughing, a half-empty bottle of champagne between them. Tiffany was recounting a story about a clumsy colleague, and Leo was listening, feeling relaxed and happy. The chime sounded, and he paused, a glass halfway to his lips. Then the voice came. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome aboard the MS Serenity. This is your captain, Catherine Mercer, speaking." The crystal flute slipped from Leo's fingers, shattering on the plush carpet and splashing champagne across his trousers. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, horrified pallor. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. It wasn't possible. It was a hallucination, a cruel, bizarre joke. Tiffany stopped laughing, her brow furrowed in confusion at his reaction. "Leo, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." But Leo couldn't answer. He was frozen, his eyes wide with terror, listening to the voice that had haunted his quiet, lonely nights, now echoing from the ceiling speaker. It was a voice he knew better than his own, but it was different, imbued with an unshakable authority and a cold, professional cadence he had never heard before. "We have just cleared the port of Miami and are now on a direct course for our first port of call, Phillipsburg, St. Martin. Our current speed is 22 knots, with calm seas and clear skies ahead. I, along with my exceptional crew, are dedicated to ensuring you have a safe, memorable, and luxurious journey with us. On behalf of everyone here, I wish you a wonderful evening and a fantastic voyage." The broadcast ended. The soft lounge music faded back in. But for Leonard Vance, the silence that followed was deafening. The gilded cage he had so carefully constructed had just slammed shut, and he realized, with a dawning, sickening horror, that his wife wasn't just the ship's captain. She was his jailer. Panic seized Leo in its icy grip. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. He stared at the speaker on the ceiling, as if it were a malevolent eye that had just pronounced his doom. Catherine. Captain Catherine Mercer. His Catherine. "Leo, what is it?" Tiffany demanded, her voice sharp with a mixture of concern and irritation. She knelt to pick up the broken shards of the champagne flute, her perfect mood shattered. "You're white as a sheet. Who is Catherine Mercer?" Leo's mind was a maelstrom of denial and terror. He couldn't form a coherent thought. How? Why? She was supposed to be running simulations for a route in a different hemisphere. She had never once captained a commercial cruise liner. Her entire career had been in cargo and freight. Had she lied to him? Was this some elaborate, twisted trap she had laid? She's my wife," he finally choked out, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Tiffany froze, a piece of broken glass in her hand. Her perfectly made-up face contorted, first in disbelief, then in dawning comprehension, and finally in pure fury. "Your wife?" she hissed, standing up slowly. "Your wife is the captain of this ship. Are you kidding me, Leo? Is this some kind of sick joke?" "I didn't know. I swear I had no idea," he stammered, scrambling for an explanation that didn't exist. "She pilots container ships. This doesn't make any sense." He ran a trembling hand through his hair. "She must have changed assignments. A last-minute transfer. A last-minute transfer that you conveniently failed to mention?" Tiffany's voice rose, her initial adoration for him evaporating like sea spray. "You told me she was practically a ghost. You told me she was halfway across the world. Instead, she's flying the plane we're on." "It's a ship, not a plane," he said weakly, the correction earning him a venomous glare. "Don't be an idiot, Leo. You know what I mean. We are trapped on a floating hotel for 7 days with your wife in charge." She began pacing the luxurious suite, her movements agitated and sharp, like a caged animal. "What are we going to do? Does she know we're here?" The question hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. Of course she knew. His name on the manifest, the suite number, the shared surname he had so arrogantly used. She knew everything. That welcome announcement wasn't a coincidence. It was a declaration, a shot across the bow. "We have to get off," Leo said, a desperate plan forming. "At the next port, we'll just get off." "The next port is in 2 days, Leo," Tiffany shrieked. "What do we do until then? Hide in this room, order room service for 48 hours straight, and pray she doesn't come knocking on the door?" The thought of Catherine appearing at their door, her face a mask of cold fury, sent a fresh wave of nausea through him. He felt trapped, exposed, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. The power dynamic had been completely inverted. On land, he held the cards. He was the successful partner, the one with the money and the plan. Here, he was just a passenger. And she was the captain. She held absolute authority. His mind raced. He had to think. He had to regain control. Okay, calm down," he said, trying to soothe her and himself. "Let's just be discreet. It's a huge ship. There are 3,000 people on board. We can blend in. She's on the bridge. She's busy. She won't have time to seek us out." Even as he said it, he knew how foolish it sounded. Catherine missed nothing. Her attention to detail was legendary. She would know their dinner reservations, their show tickets, every single charge they made to their room. They were rats in a maze of her own design. The first major test was just hours away, the captain's welcome gala and cocktail reception. It was a formal event, a chance for the ship's senior officers to mingle with the passengers. Attendance wasn't mandatory, but its absence would be noted. Hiding would be an admission of guilt. Going would be walking directly into the lion's den. "We have to go to the gala," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Tiffany stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. "Absolutely not. I am not parading myself in front of your wife like some cheap prize you've won." "We have no choice," he insisted, his desperation making him bold. "If we don't show up, it looks like we're hiding. It's suspicious. We have to act normal. We'll go, have one drink, stay in the back, and leave. We'll pretend we didn't hear the announcement properly, that we thought she said Catherine Mercer, but it couldn't possibly be her." It was a flimsy, pathetic strategy, but it was all he had. Meanwhile, on the bridge, the ship sailed smoothly through the darkening water. Ava Rostova watched her captain, who had returned to her duties with an unnerving placidity. She hadn't mentioned the announcement or shown any sign of distress. But Ava had seen the passenger manifest. She had seen the name Vance next to the most expensive suite on the ship. She wasn't sure of the details, but she knew a storm was brewing, and it had nothing to do with the weather. "Captain," Ava said gently, "the welcome gala begins at 20 hours. Will you be attending the pre-reception with the senior staff?" Catherine turned from the window, her expression unreadable. For a fleeting second, Ava saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a deep, profound hurt. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a steely resolve. "Of course, Commander," Catherine said, her voice perfectly even. "I wouldn't miss it for the world. Have my dress uniform pressed and ready. I want to look my best when I greet our passengers." Her gaze drifted back to the dark ocean. She knew Leo and his companion would be agonizing over what to do. She knew they would feel the walls of their luxurious prison closing in, and she knew that tonight, at the gala, they would be forced to face her. The unveiling was over. The confrontation was about to begin. She would not be the wronged wife. She would be the captain, in full command, on her terms. The Starlight Ballroom was a spectacle of polished brass, gleaming crystal, and deep mahogany. A 10-piece orchestra played classic show tunes as waiters weaved through the well-dressed crowd with trays of champagne and intricate canapes. The room buzzed with the cheerful, unburdened energy of people on vacation. For Leo and Tiffany, it felt like a funeral procession, and they were the guests of honor. Leo's tuxedo felt like a straitjacket, the bow tie choking him. He had sweated through his first shirt while dressing. Tiffany stood beside him in a slinky, backless crimson dress that, on any other night, would have made him feel like the luckiest man alive. Tonight, it felt like a garish costume, a beacon of their indiscretion. They had found a small table in a dimly lit corner, hoping to be swallowed by the shadows, but the ballroom was so brightly lit they felt utterly exposed. "Just one drink, then we leave," Leo muttered, downing his champagne in a single gulp and immediately grabbing another from a passing tray. "Stop it, you look terrified," Tiffany hissed, her own smile a brittle, painted-on facade. "You need to get a grip. You said to act normal. This isn't normal." But there was nothing normal about this. Every time the ballroom doors opened, Leo's heart leaped into his throat. He scanned the crowd, a nervous wreck, looking for a glimpse of her. He felt like a condemned man waiting for the executioner. Then, a hush fell over the room. The orchestra leader tapped his stand, and all eyes turned to the grand staircase at the far end of the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice boomed over the speakers, "may I present the senior officers of the MS Serenity and your captain, Catherine Mercer." The orchestra struck up a regal, welcoming tune. One by one, the senior officers descended the staircase in their immaculate dress uniforms, smiling and waving to the applauding passengers. And then, at the top of the stairs, she appeared. Catherine was a vision of command. Her white dress uniform was tailored to perfection, adorned with her medals and golden epaulets. Her dark hair was styled in an elegant chignon, and her face, under the soft lights of the chandeliers, was poised and serene. She descended the stairs with a grace and confidence that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. She wasn't just an officer. She was royalty. Leo felt Tiffany's nails dig into his arm. He couldn't breathe. This was not the woman he had left in their quiet suburban home. This was not the tired, distracted wife who spoke of cargo manifests. This was a powerful, formidable woman who commanded 100,000-ton vessel and the unwavering respect of 1,000 crew members. He had never seen her like this. He had never truly understood the scope of her world, and in that moment, he had never felt smaller. Their eyes met across the crowded ballroom. It was only for a second, but it was enough. He saw no anger, no hatred, no tears. He saw nothing but a calm, cool assessment. The same look she might give a distant storm cloud on the horizon. It was a look of utter, chilling indifference, and it terrified him more than any screaming match could have. She broke eye contact first, turning her attention to the guests, smiling warmly as she shook hands with an elderly couple. She began to work the room, accompanied by her first officer, moving with an effortless poise. She was the consummate host, laughing, chatting, and putting everyone at ease. Everyone but him. Leo watched her slow, deliberate path through the ballroom, a path that was inexorably, tortuously, leading directly to their dark corner. He wanted to run, to bolt from the room, but his feet were cemented to the floor. "She's coming over here," Tiffany whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Leo, do something." But what could he do? He was paralyzed. Finally, she stood before their table. First Officer Rostova stood a respectful pace behind her, her expression neutral, but her eyes missing nothing. The cheerful music of the orchestra seemed to fade into a distant hum. "Good evening," Catherine said, her voice as smooth and cool as the champagne in her hand. She wasn't looking at him. Her gaze was fixed entirely on Tiffany. "I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Captain Mercer. Welcome aboard my ship." Tiffany, caught off guard, stammered, Tiffany Monroe. It's a beautiful ship, Captain." "We're proud of her," Catherine replied, her smile never reaching her eyes. Then, and only then, did she turn her gaze to Leo. It was like being pinned by a searchlight. "Leonard, what a surprise. I wasn't aware your leadership conference was a maritime affair this year." The polite public cruelty of the remark was a physical blow. He felt the blood rush to his face. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was a fish, gasping for air on the deck. It was a last-minute change," he finally managed, the lie so flimsy it was insulting. "I see," Catherine said, her tone implying she saw everything with perfect clarity. She took a small sip of her drink, her eyes never leaving his. "Well, I certainly hope the company is to your liking." She glanced pointedly at Tiffany, then back at him. "You've booked the Grand Astoria suite. An excellent choice. It has a wonderful view of the ship's wake, all the things you're leaving behind." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, coated in a poison of politeness that made it impossible for him to react without causing a scene. He was being dismantled, piece by piece, in full view of everyone, yet no one could see the blade. "You'll find we run a very tight ship here, Leonard," she continued, her voice dropping almost to a whisper. "For his ears only. Everything is logged. Everything is noted. There are no secrets at sea. Remember that." She gave him one last, lingering look, a look that stripped him of all his self-importance and left him feeling like a foolish, errant child. Then she turned her brilliant, false smile back on. "Well, I must continue my rounds. Do enjoy the rest of your evening." She gave a slight nod. "Miss Monroe." And with that, she was gone, gliding away to greet other passengers, leaving Leo and Tiffany in a bubble of stunned, humiliated silence. The orchestra swelled, the chatter returned, but their world had been irrevocably shattered. The confrontation was over. The psychological warfare had just begun. The MS Serenity became a prison of paradise. Every luxury, the gourmet restaurants, the sparkling pools, the vibrant casino, felt tainted, imbued with the spectre of Catherine's authority. Leo and Tiffany were no longer on a romantic getaway. They were inmates in a floating panopticon, constantly under surveillance. Catherine never sought them out again directly. She didn't have to. Her power was ambient, woven into the very fabric of the ship's daily life. When they went to the formal dining room, they found themselves seated at the worst table, tucked away near the noisy clatter of the kitchen doors. When they booked a couple's massage at the spa, their appointment was regrettably lost due to a system glitch. Their room service was always inexplicably late, and their cabin steward seemed to clean their suite only at the most inconvenient times, forcing them out onto their balcony, where they felt watched by 1,000 unseen eyes. These were small, petty inconveniences, impossible to prove as deliberate acts of malice, but their cumulative effect was suffocating. Leo knew it was her, a silent, methodical campaign of psychological attrition. He saw her from a distance sometimes, standing on a wing of the bridge, observing the passengers below, or walking the promenade deck with her senior officers. She never acknowledged him, her gaze always sweeping past him, as if he were just another piece of deck furniture. Her indifference was a far crueler punishment than her anger would have been. The ship's crew, loyal to their captain, became instruments of his torment. Their service remained professional, but there was a new, subtle edge to it. The bartenders seemed to take longer to serve him. The waiters met his eyes with a knowing pity that made his skin crawl. He could feel the whispers that followed them as they walked through the public areas. He didn't know how the story had spread. Perhaps a knowing glance from a senior officer, a bit of gossip from the bridge, but he had no doubt that the crew knew. They were the couple in 14-1, the captain's cheating husband and his mistress. They were a scandal, a cautionary tale. Tiffany was not handling the pressure well. The glamorous, carefree woman who had boarded the ship in Miami had been replaced by a tense, irritable stranger. The fantasy had been brutally punctured, and she was left with the grim reality of the situation. "Everyone is staring at us," she complained, as they sat by the adult-only pool, trying to pretend they were having a good time. "That woman over there has been looking at us and whispering to her friend for 10 minutes. "You're being paranoid," Leo snapped, though he knew she was right. "I'm not being paranoid, Leo. This is a nightmare," she retorted, her voice a low, angry hiss. "Your wife is toying with us. She's making our lives miserable, and you're just sitting here, letting her do it." "What do you want me to do, Tiffany?" he shot back, his own nerves frayed to the breaking point. "March up to the bridge and demand she stop? She's the captain. She could have me put in the brig if she wanted to." He wasn't entirely sure if cruise ships still had brigs, but the image was terrifyingly vivid. Their days took on a miserable routine. They would wake up late, have a tense breakfast in their suite, and then try to find some secluded corner of the ship where they could avoid the judgmental eyes of the crew and other passengers. The beautiful Caribbean ports of call, St. Martin, St. Thomas, offered little respite. Even on land, surrounded by thousands of other tourists, they felt like fugitives, expecting to see Catherine's steely gaze around every corner. Halfway through the cruise, a squall hit the ship. It wasn't a dangerous storm, but it was strong enough to create rough seas. The vessel began to pitch and roll, and an announcement was made for passengers to remain in their cabins or seated in the main lounges. From their suite, Leo and Tiffany watched the dark, churning waves slam against their balcony doors. The ship groaned and creaked, sounds that were deeply unsettling to a landlubber like Leo. He felt a primal fear, a complete loss of control. He was at the mercy of the storm and at the mercy of the one person who could navigate them through it. Just then, Catherine's voice came over the intercom, the same calm, reassuring tone from the first night. "Good afternoon, passengers. This is your captain speaking. We are currently experiencing some inclement weather, with winds gusting up to 40 knots. Please be assured that this is well within the operating capabilities of the MS Serenity. I and my experienced bridge team are monitoring the situation closely, and I have adjusted our course to minimize the discomfort. The worst of the weather should pass within the next 2 hours. In the meantime, please exercise caution when moving about the ship." Hearing her voice, so steady and competent amidst the chaos, was the final humiliation. While he was cowering in his cabin, she was up on the bridge, fighting the storm, commanding the elements, responsible for the lives of 3,000 souls. She was magnificent, and he was nothing. A stowaway, a pathetic secret. Tiffany looked at him, her expression a mixture of fear and contempt. "She's in complete control, isn't she?" she said, the words a quiet admission of defeat. He could only nod. The last embers of Tiffany's attraction to him were being extinguished by the storm. She had been drawn to his power, his confidence, his success in the corporate world. But on this ship, his world meant nothing. He was powerless, a cuckolded husband being taught a slow, brutal lesson by a wife he had fatally underestimated. The whispers on the water had become a roar, and it was the sound of his life capsizing. The storm passed, leaving behind calm seas and a permanently altered emotional landscape in Suite 1401. The illusion of their affair, once so glittering and potent, was now a waterlogged wreck. For Tiffany, the cruise had become an excruciating exercise in public humiliation. The man she had admired, the powerful partner who promised her the world, had been reduced to a nervous, defeated shell. Her breaking point came on the 5th day, during a disastrous dinner at the ship's exclusive specialty restaurant, a place they had paid a hefty surcharge to attend. They were seated next to a table of senior officers, including Ava Rostova. The officers were polite, but their presence was an oppressive weight. Every bite of food tasted like cardboard. "I can't do this anymore, Leo," Tiffany said, pushing her plate of barely touched lobster away. Her voice was flat, devoid of its earlier fire. "This is over." Leo looked up, startled. "What are you talking about? We just have to get through 2 more days." "No, we don't have to do anything," she corrected him. "I am done. This whole thing, it was a mistake. I see that now." She looked at him, her eyes clear and cold. "You told me she didn't care. You told me your marriage was a formality. You lied to me. You're terrified of her. And frankly, seeing you like this, it's not attractive." The words were a brutal, final blow to his already shattered ego. "Tiffany, please, don't," she cut him off. "I'm going to go talk to her." Leo stared at her, horrified. "Are you insane? You can't do that. What would you even say?" "I'm going to appeal to her, woman to woman," Tiffany said, a naive determination in her eyes. "I'll tell her I made a mistake, that I was misled. I'll apologize. Maybe she'll have some decency and let me off this floating hellhole at the next port." Before Leo could protest further, she stood up, smoothed her dress, and walked resolutely out of the restaurant. He was left alone at the table, the sympathetic stares of the ship's officers burning into his back. Tiffany, using a combination of charm and desperation, managed to get a message to the bridge, requesting a brief, private word with the captain. She was told to wait in a small, sterile officers' lounge near the command center. After 20 minutes that felt like an eternity, the door opened and Captain Catherine Mercer entered. She was still in her working uniform, her face impassive. She didn't sit down. "You have 5 minutes, Miss Monroe," Catherine said, her voice devoid of any warmth. Tiffany swallowed hard, her carefully rehearsed speech suddenly feeling foolish. "Captain Mercer, Catherine, I wanted to apologize for everything. I was wrong. Leo, Mr. Vance, he told me things about your marriage. He misled me." Catherine listened without a single flicker of emotion. Her silence was more intimidating than any outburst would have been. "Are you finished?" she asked when Tiffany trailed off. Yes. I just want to get off this ship. I want to go home. If you could just let me disembark at Nassau tomorrow." Catherine took a step closer, her blue eyes pinning Tiffany in place. "Let me be very clear, Miss Monroe. My marriage and what my husband told you are of no concern to me. You are a passenger on my vessel, and you entered into a personal arrangement with another passenger. That is your business." However, her voice dropped, taking on a razor's edge. "You have made it my business by conducting this affair on my ship. You have created a situation that is a distraction and a potential disruption to the good order of this vessel." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "I am not interested in your apologies or your excuses. I am interested only in resolution. So here is my offer. At Nassau, a private tender, will be waiting at 8 hours. It will take you to the shore. From there, you will be escorted to the airport, where a one-way ticket to Miami in your name will be waiting for you. You will take your handbag, and that is all. The rest of your luggage will be sent to your home address. You will not speak to my husband again. You will not attempt to contact him. In return, I will consider this matter concluded." Tiffany stared at her, stunned by the cold, logistical efficiency of the proposal. There was no negotiation, no discussion. It was a command. "And if I don't agree?" Tiffany asked weakly. A small, humorless smile touched Catherine's lips. "Then you will remain on this ship until we return to Miami. But I can assure you, Miss Monroe, the final 48 hours of your journey will be profoundly unpleasant." There was no choice. "I agree," Tiffany whispered. "Excellent," Catherine said, her tone all business. "Be at gangway C at 08. Sort of sharp." She turned and left without another word. When Tiffany returned to the suite, she found Leo pacing anxiously. She told him about the conversation, about the offer. He listened, his face crumbling with each word. "You're just going to leave?" he asked, his voice cracking. "You're just going to leave me here, alone?" "This was never about us, Leo," she said, her voice filled with a final, weary pity. "This was about you and her. I was just a pawn in a game I didn't even know I was playing. Goodbye." She spent the night on the sofa. The next morning, Leo, driven by a desperate, last-ditch effort to salvage some semblance of control, did the one thing he should never have done. He took a crew-only elevator and made his way up to the bridge. When he found the door, he hammered on it with his fists. "Catherine, we need to talk! Open this door!" The door was opened instantly by two burly security officers. Ava Rostova stood behind them, her face a mask of cold fury. "Mr. Vance, this is a restricted area," Ava said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Access to the navigational bridge is strictly forbidden for all passengers. You are compromising the safety of this vessel." "I need to speak to my wife," he yelled, trying to push past them. From inside the bridge, Catherine's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Commander Rostova, the passenger seems to be disoriented and is causing a security issue. Please escort him back to his suite and confine him there until further notice. He is to have no access to any of the ship's bars or lounges. Post a guard at his door." "Yes, Captain," Ava said. Leo's frantic struggles were useless against the two security men. They dragged him away, a babbling, humiliated mess, down the sterile crew corridors. He had played his last card and lost spectacularly. He was no longer just a passenger. He was a prisoner, confined to the very suite that was supposed to have been his love nest, a testament to his spectacular, catastrophic failure. The final day of the cruise was a long, silent torment for Leo. He was a captive in his opulent suite, with a polite but unyielding security guard stationed outside his door. The champagne was gone, replaced by bottles of complimentary water. The vibrant life of the ship, the music, the laughter, the announcements for bingo and trivia, filtered through the door as distant, mocking echoes of a world he was no longer a part of. He tried to watch television, but his mind couldn't focus. He stood on his balcony for hours, watching the endless blue of the ocean, feeling his insignificance in its vastness. Tiffany was gone. He had watched her from the balcony at 8 a.m. sharp, a small, lonely figure, climbing into a waiting boat and speeding away towards the Nassau shore, disappearing from his life as quickly as she had entered it. He was utterly, completely alone. The humiliation was a physical ache in his chest. He replayed the entire week in his mind, a slideshow of his own arrogance and stupidity. He had seen Catherine as a predictable, distant part of his life, a fixture he could easily manage and deceive. He had never truly seen her. The formidable intellect, the steely discipline, the quiet strength that allowed her to command the respect of 1,000 people and guide a vessel the size of a skyscraper through the world's oceans. He hadn't just cheated on his wife, he had fundamentally disrespected the very core of who she was, and she had responded by reminding him, in no uncertain terms, of his own irrelevance in her world. As the MS Serenity sailed into the port of Miami in the early morning light, the sight of the familiar skyline brought no relief, only a sense of finality. His sham of a life was over. The game was up. An hour after the ship had docked and the noisy bustle of disembarking passengers had begun, there was a sharp knock on his door. It wasn't the guard. He opened it to find First Officer Ava Rostova. "The captain will see you now," she said, her expression unreadable. "Follow me." She led him not down to the gangway, but up, through a series of private corridors, to the captain's personal quarters. The suite was spacious but Spartan, decorated with nautical charts and framed photos of ships, not family. It was a room that belonged to a captain, not a wife. Catherine was standing by the large porthole, looking out at the port. She was no longer in her dress whites, but in the same kind of practical navy blue uniform she wore on the bridge. She didn't turn when he entered. "You are the last passenger on board, Leonard," she said, her voice quiet but resonant in the silent room. "I had you held so we could have this conversation without an audience." She finally turned to face him. Her face was tired, the mask of command laid aside, revealing the woman beneath. He saw the hurt there, finally, but it was overshadowed by an immense, unshakable strength. "I won't ask you why," she said. "I've spent enough nights alone at sea to understand loneliness, and enough time on land to understand betrayal. The why doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what happens now." Leo found his voice, a weak, hoarse thing. "Kate, I am so sorry. I never—" "Don't," she said, holding up a hand. "Don't you dare. Your apologies are as worthless as your lies. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught in the most spectacularly humiliating way possible." He couldn't deny it. He fell silent. "When I get home in 2 days, after my duties here are complete," she continued, her voice clinical and precise, "I expect your things to be gone. The house is in my name. It was mine before we married. You will find your belongings packed and in a storage unit, the key to which my lawyer will forward to yours. He will also be forwarding the divorce papers. I will be generous, far more generous than you deserve, on the condition that you sign them without contest. No arguments, no delays. A clean break." She walked to her desk and picked up a single sheet of paper. "This is a statement. It confirms that your confinement to your quarters was a result of a security breach on the bridge and your subsequent belligerent behavior. It makes no mention of our personal relationship. You will sign it. It will protect the cruise line, and it will give you a semi-plausible reason for your conduct, should anyone ask." She held it out to him. It was his final indignity, signing a document that legally codified his own pathetic downfall. He took the pen with a trembling hand and signed his name. "Good," she said, taking the paper back. "Now you can go." He stood there for a moment, a lifetime of memories, both good and bad, flashing through his mind. He looked at this incredible, powerful woman he had so carelessly thrown away, and felt a loss so profound it was a physical void. "Kate, for what it's worth," he began. "It's worth nothing, Leonard," she said, her voice softening just a fraction, not with pity, but with finality. "Goodbye." He turned and walked out of the room, escorted by Ava Rostova down to the empty gangway, As he stepped onto the solid ground of the port, he felt unsteady, as if the world were still rocking beneath his feet. He looked back up at the magnificent ship, at the distant, tinted windows of the bridge where he knew she would soon be, and he understood. He had dropped his anchor in another woman's harbour, only to find that his wife was the master of the entire ocean. And so, Leonard Vance walked away, not just from a ship, but from a life he had single-handedly destroyed. Captain Catherine Mercer's story isn't just about revenge. It's a powerful testament to reclaiming your own narrative. She didn't crumble in the face of betrayal. She used the very authority and discipline her husband resented to take back control of her life, proving that the greatest strength isn't found in avoiding storms, but in learning how to command your vessel right through them. Her journey from a wronged wife to the undisputed master of her own destiny is a reminder that we all have a captain's strength within us. If you were moved by Catherine's incredible story of resilience and empowerment, please let us know in the comments below. What would you have done in her situation? We love hearing your thoughts. And if you want more stories of justice, drama, and personal triumph, don't forget to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more content just like this. Thank you for listening.